Have you ever ordered a glass of Japanese whiskey expecting something delicate and elegant, and instead got something that tasted suspiciously like Scotch wearing a kimono? You're not alone. Over the last 2 decades, Japanese whiskey went from obscure curiosity to global obsession, with collectors paying hundreds for bottles that used to sit unnoticed on liquor store shelves. But here's the twist. Not every bottle labeled Japanese whiskey tells the same story. Some explain the craft, some reveal the science, and a few expose the controversy. Today, we're counting down 7 bottles that explain Japanese whiskey, from the gateway dram to the bottle that changed how the world understands the category. Number 7, Suntory Toki. The easiest way to misunderstand Japanese whiskey is to assume it's meant for quiet contemplation in a leather chair. That image might work for Scotch, but in Japan, the most common way to drink whiskey is actually loud, social, and filled with ice and soda. That's where Suntory Toki enters the story. This bottle exists to explain the everyday side of Japanese whiskey culture, the version that lives in busy Tokyo bars where the bartender moves faster than the subway schedule. Toki debuted in 2016, primarily aimed at the American market, but its philosophy comes straight from Japan's highball tradition. The name literally means time, which feels fitting because the whiskey blends spirits from 3 Suntory distilleries, Yamazaki, Hakushu, and Chita, each bringing a different character to the glass. Yamazaki contributes soft fruit and spice, Hakushu adds a hint of green herbal freshness, and Chita's grain whiskey supplies a smooth backbone that ties everything together. On paper, it sounds like a careful orchestra of flavors, but the real magic appears when you see how the whiskey behaves in a tall glass with ice and sparkling water. Pour it neat first, and the aroma is surprisingly bright. Green apple, gentle vanilla, and a whisper of citrus rise from the glass without the heavy oak punch people expect from many whiskeys. Take a sip and the texture feels light on its feet, almost nimble, with ginger and white pepper flickering briefly before fading into a clean finish. Nothing here shouts for attention, which is exactly the point. Toki was designed to be refreshing rather than overwhelming, a whiskey that complements conversation rather than dominating it. Now try the second glass test, the highball. Ice first, whiskey second, then cold soda sliding down the side of the glass. Suddenly the profile transforms. The citrus becomes brighter, the spice sharper, and the entire drink feels almost electric. Instead of a dense spirit demanding analysis, you get something crisp and energetic, the sort of drink that can accompany grilled yakitori or a long night of conversation without ever feeling heavy. This bottle explains something fundamental about Japanese whiskey culture. In many Western countries, whiskey carries a certain seriousness, a ritual of slow sipping and careful evaluation. Japan took that same spirit and made it social. The highball boom in Japanese bars during the late 2000s turned whiskey into a casual drink again, and bottles like Toki became the ambassador of that philosophy abroad. That's why it lands at number 7. Toki isn't the deepest or rarest Japanese whiskey, but it's the gateway that shows how the category actually lives in everyday life. Before collectors chased limited releases and auction prices climbed into absurd territory, Japanese whiskey was simply something people enjoyed with dinner, and Toki quietly keeps that tradition alive in every tall, sparkling glass. Number 6, Nikka coffee grain. If Suntory Toki explains the social side of Japanese whiskey, Nikka coffee grain explains the machinery behind the magic. Most whiskey drinkers spend their time debating single malts, arguing over peat levels and cask types, but the real secret weapon of Japanese blending often hides in plain sight: grain whiskey. This bottle takes something normally used in the background and moves it directly into the spotlight. The name might sound like it refers to coffee, but the story actually begins with a piece of Victorian engineering. The coffee still, invented in the 1830s by Irish engineer Aeneas Coffey, was designed for continuous distillation. Unlike the traditional pot stills used for many single malts, this system produces a smoother spirit with remarkable consistency. When Nikka imported its coffee stills from Scotland in the 1960s, the company gained a tool that would shape its entire blending philosophy. Grain whiskey is usually treated like the quiet rhythm section in a band. It keeps everything balanced while the louder instruments, those bold single malts, take center stage. Nikka decided to flip that idea around. Instead of hiding grain whiskey in a blend, they bottled it almost on its own, letting drinkers taste the smooth sweetness normally buried beneath other flavors. Pour a glass, and the difference becomes clear immediately. The aroma leans toward honey, caramel, and bright citrus, rather than smoke or heavy oak. There's a soft vanilla note drifting underneath, like the scent of pastry dough warming in an oven. Compared to the sharper edges of many whiskeys, the nose feels almost silky, a preview of the texture waiting on the palate. The first sip glides rather than punches. Sweet corn, candied orange peel, and creamy toffee unfold gradually, each flavor appearing like a new instrument joining a melody. The body carries surprising weight despite the whiskey's elegance, coating the tongue with a buttery smoothness that lingers long after the sip ends. Instead of the aggressive heat some whiskeys deliver, coffee grain settles into a gentle warmth that spreads slowly. Trying it in a second glass changes the experience again. Add a single ice cube and the sweetness stretches wider, revealing notes of coconut and ripe banana that weren't obvious before. The whiskey seems to breathe, shifting from dessert-like richness towards something brighter and more refreshing. That adaptability explains why grain whiskey plays such a critical role in Japanese blending. Its flexibility lets blenders sculpt flavors with incredible precision. Nikka coffee grain also tells a broader story about Japanese craftsmanship. Japanese whiskey producers rarely swap spirit between rival companies the way Scottish distilleries often do. Because of that, each company must produce a wide variety of whiskeys internally to create complex blends. Coffee still grain whiskey became one of the key building blocks for Nikka's style, allowing their blenders to layer sweetness, texture, and balance without relying on outside sources. That's why this bottle lands at number 6. It reveals the hidden engine room of Japanese whiskey, the part of the craft most drinkers never see. Without spirits like coffee grain quietly shaping the structure of countless blends, many of the famous Japanese whiskeys people celebrate today simply wouldn't exist. Sometimes the most important ingredient in a great whiskey isn't the loudest one in the glass. It's the one working patiently behind the scenes. If you're enjoying the breakdown so far, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm you want more deep dives into the bottles behind global drinking culture. Now let's move higher on the list, because the next whiskey takes us into the forests of Japan. Number 5, Hakushu Distiller's Reserve. If one bottle explains the environmental personality of Japanese whiskey, it's Hakushu Distiller's Reserve. While many people picture whiskey aging in dark stone warehouses beside cold Scottish seas, Hakushu comes from a very different place. The distillery sits deep in the forests of Japan's southern Alps, surrounded by pine, moss, and mountain water that feels almost impossibly pure. Suntory built Hakushu in 1973 specifically to create a different style from Yamazaki, and the landscape shaped the whiskey's character from the very beginning. Pour a glass and the aroma immediately hints at that setting. Instead of heavy oak or caramel, the nose feels green and lively. Fresh herbs, crisp apple, and faint smoke drift upward in layers that seem more like a forest breeze than a traditional whiskey aroma. It's the sort of scent that feels refreshing rather than imposing, as if the whiskey spent its life breathing mountain air. The first sip moves with surprising precision. A quick flash of citrus leads the way, followed by mint, green tea, and a gentle thread of smoke curling through the background. That smoke never overwhelms the other notes. It simply anchors them. The overall effect feels clean and structured, almost like tasting the idea of nature rather than a heavy barrel-aged spirit. Now try it again with a splash of water. The transformation is subtle but fascinating. The herbal edge grows brighter, the smoke softens into something almost sweet, and the finish stretches longer across the palate. Suddenly, the whiskey feels wider, revealing details that were hiding beneath the surface. Hakushu Distiller's Reserve earns its place in this countdown because it demonstrates how Japanese whiskey often prioritizes balance and restraint over brute force. It doesn't compete with the peat monsters of Scotland or the oak-heavy bourbons of Kentucky. Instead, it quietly builds a flavor profile that feels calm, elegant, and remarkably drinkable. In other words, this bottle explains a core idea behind Japanese whiskey. Sometimes complexity whispers rather than shouts. Number 4, Nikka Yoichi. Single malt. Where Hakushu represents Japanese elegance, Nikka Single Malt tells the story of stubborn ambition. The distillery sits on the northern island of Hokkaido, a place chosen deliberately by Nikka founder Masataka Taketsuru because it reminded him of Scotland. Cold winters, sea air, and dramatic coastal weather create conditions that echo the birthplace of traditional whiskey making. That connection isn't just romantic storytelling. Yoichi still uses a rare technique called coal-fired distillation, a method most distilleries abandoned decades ago because it's difficult to control. The flames heat the stills unevenly, forcing distillers to rely on instinct and experience rather than automated systems. The reward for that extra effort is a spirit with deeper texture and character. The whiskey's aroma reflects that rugged process immediately. Smoke rises from the glass in soft curls, joined by roasted nuts and a hint of sea salt. There's also a subtle sweetness underneath, like caramel warming near a campfire. Instead of delicate brightness, Yoichi introduces a darker, moodier tone. The first sip confirms the promise. Peat smoke rolls across the palate, followed by cocoa, dried fruit, and a touch of briny air that feels almost maritime. The whiskey has weight, the kind that lingers on the tongue and invites another slow sip. Give the second glass a single cube of ice, and the experience changes again. The smoke becomes smoother, the sweetness more pronounced, and the entire profile feels rounder. What seemed intense at first suddenly opens into something layered and balanced. Yoichi lands at number 4 because it shows the Scottish influence embedded in Japanese whiskey's DNA. Long before Japanese whiskey won global awards, its founders studied in Scotland, learning the craft before adapting it back home. Yoichi is the living evidence of that heritage, a whiskey that carries both traditions in every sip. Number 3. Hibiki Japanese Harmony. By the time you reach Hibiki Japanese Harmony, the story of Japanese whiskey shifts from distilling to artistry. Hibiki isn't built around a single distillery or a single flavor profile. Instead, it represents the Japanese philosophy of blending, where multiple whiskeys combine to form something more graceful than any individual component. The bottle itself hints at that idea. Hibiki's iconic design features 24 facets around the glass, symbolizing the traditional Japanese calendar and its changing seasons. It's a subtle reminder that time, environment, and patience all contribute to the final flavor inside. Lift the glass and the aroma unfolds gently but steadily. Honey, orange peel, and polished oak appear first, followed by floral notes that drift in quietly. There's no sharp edge here, no aggressive spice. Everything feels arranged with intention, like instruments tuning before a symphony begins. The first sip reveals why blending sits at the heart of Japanese whiskey craftsmanship. Sweet fruit glides across the palate, apricot, candied citrus, and a touch of vanilla, while faint spice and oak weave through the background. Each flavor enters and exits with careful timing, never competing for attention. A second tasting deepens the experience. Let the whiskey sit for a moment before sipping again. The warmth encourages additional layers to appear. Sandalwood, light chocolate, and delicate herbal notes that linger on the finish. The whiskey doesn't rush its story, it unfolds gradually. Hibiki Japanese Harmony ranks this high because it demonstrates the precision of Japanese blending techniques. While many whiskey traditions celebrate the individuality of a single distillery, Japanese producers often pursue harmony above all else. They craft blends that feel balanced, smooth, and quietly complex. This bottle isn't just a drink, it's a lesson in orchestration, how multiple voices can come together to create a single, unforgettable melody. Number 2, Yamazaki Distiller's Reserve. If Japanese whiskey has a birthplace, it's Yamazaki. Long before collectors hunted rare bottles or auction prices climbed into absurd territory, this distillery quietly started a revolution. Suntory founder Shinjiro Tori opened Yamazaki in 1923 on the outskirts of Kyoto, choosing the site for its famous water and humid climate. The location sits where 3 rivers meet, creating conditions that accelerate maturation while preserving delicate aromas. Yamazaki Distiller's Reserve captures that history in a surprisingly approachable bottle. Pour a glass and the aroma greets you with bright fruit, strawberry, raspberry, and orange peel, alongside soft vanilla drifting from oak casks. There's an inviting warmth to the scent, almost like walking past a bakery just as something sweet comes out of the oven. The first sip unfolds gradually rather than exploding with intensity. Red berries appear first, followed by gentle spice and a subtle thread of oak that adds structure without dominating the palate. The texture feels silky, carrying the flavors forward with a quiet confidence that rewards slow sipping. Trying the whiskey again after a short pause reveals even more character. The fruit becomes deeper, almost jam-like, while hints of cinnamon and toasted wood rise gently in the background. The finish lingers with soft sweetness rather than sharp heat, leaving a memory that invites another taste. Yamazaki Distillers Reserve earns the number 2 spot because it explains where Japanese whiskey truly began. Every innovation, every award, and every modern distillery traces part of its lineage back to this place. The bottle may not be the rarest expression Yamazaki produces, but it captures the spirit of the distillery that started everything. In a category now filled with new producers and experimental releases, Yamazaki still feels like the original blueprint. Number 1, Nikka From the Barrel. The final bottle on this list doesn't just explain Japanese whiskey, it reveals the entire puzzle behind the category. Nikka From the Barrel looks almost unassuming on the shelf, a compact square bottle that feels more like a chemistry sample than a luxury spirit. But inside that glass lies one of the most powerful expressions of Japanese blending philosophy. Unlike many whiskeys that emphasize softness and elegance, this one arrives with unapologetic intensity. Bottled at 51.4% alcohol, the whiskey carries a bold presence from the moment it touches the glass. The aroma opens with caramel, baking spice, and toasted oak, followed by flashes of dried fruit and warm vanilla. The first sip lands with authority. Rich toffee and cinnamon roll across the palate, joined by peppery spice and dark fruit that deepen as the whiskey settles. The higher strength gives the spirit remarkable structure, yet the flavors remain controlled rather than chaotic. Take a second taste after letting it breathe for a minute. The edges soften slightly, revealing chocolate notes and roasted nuts hiding beneath the spice. The whiskey evolves with each moment, transforming from fiery introduction to layered complexity. Nikka From the Barrel claims the top position because it showcases the engineering brilliance of Japanese blending. Instead of highlighting a single distillery or cask, the whiskey combines more than 100 individual components before resting them together again in casks to marry the flavors. That process turns a collection of spirits into something unified and powerful. In one compact bottle, you taste precision, patience, and the quiet determination that built Japan's whiskey reputation around the world. So that's the journey, from Japan's everyday highball whiskey to the bold blend that defines the craft. Which bottle would you pour first? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy breakdowns like this, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for the next countdown.